I don't even understand how you get yourself into this kind of situation.
Pyrocynical in the Furry Fandom. I know, not really something you'd expect to hear from me on this channel.
Pyrocynical, through social media apps, began messaging a 15-year-old boy while he was 19 years old for sexual gratification.
Manipulating a child into a, sexual situation.
Okay.
Pyrocynical has influence.
It literally was just fantasy furry garbage.
He should be in jail for doing this. You know what I'm saying?
He did not ask for Ivory's age, which was completely irresponsible.
There are even multiple messages of Pyrocynical admitting to trying to cover things up.
What seemed consensual and reciprocal may very well not have been.
He's into some weird stuff, you know what I'm saying? These weird fantasies.
It was just a negligent abuse of power.
Pyrocynical in the Furry Fandom. I know, not really something you'd expect to hear from me on this channel. In fact, I wasn't originally going to talk about this situation at all, simply because I don't like getting involved in what people refer to as drama in the commentary community. But in this case, it was a very serious issue. So seeing as this wasn't a case of petty high school drama and actually had some very serious implications that can be applied to practically anyone else on the internet, I thought I'd give my input on it. I mean, hell, if I'm gonna hop on this cloud train too, at the very least I want people to learn something from my words. For those that aren't in the loop about commentary community stuff, which I don't blame you in the slightest, and even though this happened about a few months ago and I'm talking about this now, an individual known as Ivory had come forward recently with information about his experiences in sexual roleplay with Pyrocynical 3 to 4 years back, when Ivory was 15 and Pyro was 19, claiming that Pyrocynical was attempting to groom and take sexual advantage of him because of his age. This information made many rounds. Pyrocynical left a response on his subreddit. People thought everything was good, it was disproved, and then wrong. Further information was added about the situation in a Google document made by Turkey Tom. People took that 14-page document and basically everything that had been released up to this point at face value, as most people on the internet would. Then what do you know? Pyro put out a response video detailing pretty much everything that happened between him and Ivory, what he was accused of in the document by Turkey Tom.
Recently, to those who are unaware, I've been accused of grooming a 15-year-old boy when I was 19. That I'm some kind of predator and was aware of his age all along.
And how everything was blown up into something it wasn't, as most things are.
People seem to be choosing what part of my statement to run with, instead of acknowledging all of it. They twist what they want to twist, misinterpret what they want to misinterpret, and then they just ignore the rest.
Although he was unaware of Ivory's age at the time, Pyro still participated in sexually fueled roleplay with him, which is the bottom line of where he messed up. Even further, knowing his age and still continuing to participate in this sexual roleplay based around certain fetishes and fantasies.
In retrospect, I never should have continued the furry stuff with him once I learnt of his age, even though at the time I didn't see it as a problem.
And Pyrocynical took responsibility for it, admitting his fault with not being careful about who he was interacting with in that manner.
Now, I do want to directly say something to Ivory and apologise to him and to anyone else that I did the furry roleplay garbage with. What seemed consensual and reciprocal may very well not have been.
And to prove his, I guess, innocence, he literally had to disclose his fetishes and sexual fantasies to the world, which honestly, that takes some fucking guts to do.
I didn't want the public to find out that I was a complete degenerate and into this furry roleplay shit. That being said, over the last couple weeks, I've learned to embrace it because that's all I can do now.
By divulging about his sexual fantasies, Pyro explained that the roleplay-based interactions that he and Ivory had were not dependent on Ivory's age.
What these people look like, their gender, these weren't variables. I could have been doing this with a 90-year-old cave troll and it wouldn't have made a difference. It was roleplay after all. You're just pretending.
So in this case, and many cases in sexual roleplay, I promise this isn't speaking from experience, Pyro had no infatuation with Ivory the individual. Ivory, the 15-year-old kid. The only sexual gratification or infatuation he was presumably gaining from their interaction was from, well, the interaction itself, or the fantasies performed between Pyro and Ivory's sonas or fictional characters. Or as I'll call it, fursonas, even though they probably aren't furries. Because of this fact, the accusation that Pyrocynical was attempting to groom Ivory was false. There was no desire for sexual activity outside of the roleplay or actions taken between the fictional characters. However, sexual roleplay with a 15-year-old is still very wrong despite not knowing their age, and the overall sense of anonymity on the internet may bring into question a few things of what really is okay to do in terms of adult-based activities, regardless of if it's behind closed doors or not. It more so depends on who is involved and from there, who is allowed to see and spread it. So let's talk about it, specifically how situations between Pyro and Ivory happened in the first place, and what practically everyone can learn from this event. Honestly, I think the easiest answer is that everyone's horny. Everyone's horny, I'm horny, you're all horny, people think with their dicks rather than their heads, that's probably all it is. I mean, take it from a furry with over 3 years of experience in the fandom. No one's innocent. Even if you think they are, people like sex. It's a common thing. I'm not divulging this further. So to start things off, I'm gonna assume that you all know what role-playing is. More specifically, what sexual role-playing is and what it might entail. The important aspect I will explain is that it generally involves fantasies clouded in fiction, with stories or activities that realistically won't be replicated in the physical, tangible world. Most of the time, they can't be. Like, look at VORE. People love it, and there's ultimately nothing wrong with it. But do you really think it can be replicated outside of fiction? That's why in these role-playing instances, personas and fursonas are used to detract from the realistic aspect of role-playing and engage the participators in a more fictional environment. The best comparison to role-playing in a physical, realistic form is, honestly, the furry fandom, with personas being created to tell stories and express creativity in a different way. That's why you have things like furry conventions and even fursuits to further express that creativity. Besides VORE, and life jackets, but mainly VORE. Contrary to popular belief, a large majority of geek and nerd culture participates in roleplay through activities like cosplaying, D&D, and so forth. Not all of it has to be sexual either. People can just have fun being, geeks. But I'm digressing. The purpose of roleplay is to scratch a really certain itch, whether that itch is pure entertainment or pure entertainment. In the case of Pyrocynical and Ivory, the reason why Pyro even participated in roleplay to begin with was to fulfill some sort of sexual fantasy or fetish. He had no intention of participating in it with anyone in particular, just someone who was willing to reciprocate or scratch that pure entertainment itch. He even mentions that he had done it with many other people he can't even recall who exactly. And I can vouch for this, as I was one of the people he did interact with in 2017 with regards to thick thighs. I don't have proof of it, as his Discord account was deleted, but hey, I never said you have to believe me on this. This event isn't pivotal to the whole explanation or argument that I'm trying to make. It's just some food for thought. I have no reason to lie. You can believe me or not. But hey, look at this cute as fuck art I commissioned from Ida back before all this happened. Thanks to Pyro for giving me the hookup on that one. Just saying, this is the one relationship I've been in that didn't go to shit. Fun fact. Wow, I live a sad life. Anyhow, Pyrocynical and roleplay. We've talked about how and why sexual roleplaying happens, but what does this mean for Ivory and or Pyrocynical? Well, the first thing this means, and this is the big reveal for everyone, is that sexual role-playing isn't the same thing as grooming. Now yes, I understand that these two aren't mutually exclusive and it's only correlative, and sexual role-playing can lead to grooming, or it can be grooming in and of itself. But with regards to Pyro's fantasies being fulfilled through role-playing, no act of grooming actually occurred. There was no intention on either party's end to have actual sex or meet up to have sex. I can see the confusion with the whole party or friend meetup Pyro had mentioned at the time, but with regards to sexual activity between the two, there was no desire to carry it out physically. That's why the sexual roleplay was strictly clouded in fiction or fantasy. However, this does not justify Pyro's actions in the situation, regardless of whether or not he was aware of Ivory's age at the time, and quite frankly, if age wasn't a factor in their sexual RP, it was still wrong. You shouldn't be having any sort of sexual conversation with a minor, period. Even if Ivory at the time might have been okay with it for whatever reason, kids can't consent. Allowing a minor to participate in a sexual activity like this is just downright manipulative, even if you don't intend for it to be so. It takes advantage of a kid because of their age and naivety, regardless of if the individual in question is a role model or of notable status like Pyro. Why did Ivory use the term grooming to describe the situation? Honestly, I don't know, but grooming is a pretty common buzzword that people recognize as an adult taking advantage of a minor in a sexual manner. However, that definition doesn't fit with the situation. But again, Pyro understands and admits his fault with not confirming Ivory's age or really anyone's age before participating in sexual roleplay. I mean, same thing happened with me. When Pyro and I first talked randomly through Discord DMs, we didn't necessarily roleplay, and he didn't ask me how old I was at the time, but he was very disclosive of his fetishes and what he loved to see. Luckily, I was 19 when we were talking, so I assumed he knew how old I was, and so it was never really brought up. But that's just the bigger problem in this whole situation that applies to pretty much everyone watching this. Obviously, there's the lesson of just don't sexually roleplay with kids or be fucking weird like that around kids in general, but there's the issue of neglecting to ensure that the person you're doing stuff like that with is an adult. I've seen all these commentary channels ending videos off here with what I just said, and that's it. I've seldom seen people talk about just how many minors are actually online who interact with content creators and influencers, with how old their audience demographic really is, and even with that, how easy it is for someone to fake their age to get brownie points from their favorite creator. When you're in a position like Pyro is, you have to be extremely careful with who you disclose your fantasies and sexual relations with. As a content creator in a similar situation, I get it. There's a sense of exhibitionism with it and you want to scratch that itch. Adults enjoy sex and want to fulfill their sexual fantasies. We're not debunking any newfound information about humans here, okay? People like sex. But when you apply this to a completely open and easy to access platform which kids frequent, that's when you have to be careful with how open you are about sex, or rather, how thirsty you are for any form of sexual gratification. There's a time and place for everything, and even though in this situation, the stuff between Ivory and Pyro was behind closed doors, it was still neglectful on Pyro's end to not confirm Ivory's age. Although some of this was Ivory's fault too, mainly with him accusing Pyro of grooming when that wasn't the case, and with regards to him sexually roleplaying with an adult. But that mainly ties to it being the adult's fault in the situation. I'm not downplaying the severity of it by saying both fucked up, as it's ultimately the adult's responsibility to know something like that is wrong and hard stop immediately. But even for the minor involved, they do have the power to say no and stop any further actions from continuing regardless of if it's consensual or not. But again, emotional and sexual manipulation is very probable. That's why it isn't really Ivory's fault unless he purposefully lied about his age. Which, oh boy, I can tell you the amount of times kids have lied about their age to get into something, commentary community especially, whew. But as much of the internet and most of social media, specifically Twitter, is heavy on anonymity and anyone of any age can join, that just can't go hand in hand with sex. And that's why precautions need to be taken for both parties. Which brings us to a little lesson for the kids watching this, or a couple of lessons. Firstly, please don't attempt to sexually interact with adults or lie about your age to gain access to adult-themed places on the internet. It's not only morally wrong, but extremely dangerous because there are actual pedophiles who will try to take advantage of kids like that as a means of justifying their disgusting behavior. Like, I can't tell you how dangerous something like that is and how much trouble you can get adults into who just don't ask. Which they should be, but again, when you factor in a computer screen to this whole equation, accountability just goes out the window. It's kind of unfortunate. Now, on the other hand, if an adult attempts to sexually interact with you, that's when you full stop talking with them. You block them, report them, warn others about them, whatever you may have it. Say no, regardless of who it is, and regardless of how much you trust them. I could care less about the issue with taking things at face value, not researching things, clout chasing, whatever. But there's a genuine safety issue with the case between Pyro and Ivory, and I highly doubt it's the only time something like this has happened in the commentary community, or the furry fandom, or the rest of geek culture. Although the furry fandom does a better job at keeping 18+ spaces private and out of reach for kids, so that's something we're doing a lot better than others. Then again, that's more IRL than that it is online, but hey. The online space is very different, but I want to hear your guys' thoughts on this, or rather, your thoughts on my thoughts. Also, to answer the question, because people will ask this, and because I've experienced and talked with Pyrocynical, is he a furry? Probably not. The dragon Sona was just used for sexual gratification. Does it really matter? I've done a video on this topic, and I highly suggest you watch this after this video. It's pretty good. I'm very proud of it. So other than that, thank you all for watching. Please stay safe out there, and obviously, stay life jacket. Take care, guys.